Violence was everywhere. Dark reputation, terrible end, a disaster, constant fear, destroyed, sin, catastrophic, punished. The world was ending. We live in a world built on the bones of empires, and sometimes on the tangled branches of family trees. An anthropology professor from Rutgers University once estimated that 80% of marriages in human history were between relatives, and not the vague, we're all distant cousin type, but close family, uncles and nieces, even brothers and sisters. For most of history, strict social rules banned such close unions, but those rules were mostly for ordinary people. For kings, queens, and emperors, marrying close relatives wasn't a scandal. It was a strategy. It kept money, land, and power locked inside the family. They called it purity of blood. In reality, it was pure politics. They preached morality to the masses while sharing both beds and crowns with their own kin. Today, we will tell the story of the most extreme dynasty of all. They bet everything on the royal marriage game and lost. Many of their heirs died in infancy. Those who lived often suffered terrible illnesses. Yet, for 2 centuries, they were the most powerful family on earth. Meet the Habsburgs. We'll see how they conquered Europe, not with armies, but with the wedding vows. We'll uncover how the church turned ancient marriage taboos into political weapons, and we'll follow their family tree to see how the same plan that built their empire slowly destroyed it. This isn't fiction. It's a real-life story, more twisted than Game of Thrones and Succession. If you enjoy stories like this, tap subscribe and like. It helps so much. Now, let's dive into the story. The Middle Ages are messy, a maze of wars, plagues, and shifting kingdoms. But one century stands out as the most brutal of all, the 14th century. Picture Europe back then. The Crusades are sputtering out, leaving behind debts and disillusionment. England and France are locked in what will become the 100 Years' War. Italy is a patchwork of warring city-states. Spain is still split, fighting the centuries-long Reconquista against Muslim rule. In Central Europe, there is no united Germany, only the vast but crumbling Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of hundreds of tiny states barely held together. Then a disaster struck, the Black Death. The plague swept through Europe like a scythe. In just 7 years, between 1/3 and half of all Europeans died. Imagine losing every other person you know. Bodies piled in the streets, with no one left to bury them. And even in the middle of this horror, wars raged on. Violence was everywhere. Flee the war in northern France, and you might end up facing Mediterranean pirates who didn't just attack ships. They burned towns and sold entire populations into slavery in North Africa. Feudal lords ruled over villages like gang bosses. Peasants paid for protection from bandits, protection that often failed. Life was cheap. Now imagine you were born in the 14th century. You are probably a peasant. 85% of people were. If you survived a childhood diseases, that's a miracle. Survive plague? Another miracle. Even nature seemed to turn against you. The medieval warm period ended. Snow fell in Italy for the first time in centuries. The Great Famine wiped out to a quarter of people in some cities. Many believed the world was ending. But what if you were lucky and born into a noble family? Forget romantic ideas about medieval luxury. You'd still be a pawn in a family power game. Your happiness didn't matter. Your life was arranged by the family patriarch, whose job was to use you to grow wealth and influence. The 14th century broke the elite though too. Wars and plagues killed nobles as easily as peasants. The average lifespan of the aristocracy fell from 64 to 45. Entire noble houses vanished, leaving openings for the new families to rise, like Trastamares in Spain, the Ottomans in Turkey, and in the chaos of Germany, the Habsburgs. But even before their rise, the Habsburgs learned how fragile power could be. In 1315, they were humiliated at the Battle of Morgarten when Swiss peasants trapped their knights in a narrow alpine pass, rained down rocks, and finished them with halberds. Their army was destroyed, but the Habsburgs didn't disappear. They recovered and began to focus on politics and marriage instead of risky battles. A preview of the strategy that would define them. So, who were these Habsburgs? Forget the later myth that traced them back to Julius Caesar or ancient heroes. Their beginnings were humble, almost embarrassing. They were minor landowners in what is now southwestern Germany. The founder? A man called Guntram the Rich in the 10th century. The name was ironic. He was greedy and ruthless, known for squeezing his peasants dry and forcing them to work his fields. Those who refused? Punished. His cruelty cost him his lands. The Holy Roman Emperor seized them. The Habsburg story should have ended right there, but somehow the land ended up in hands of his heirs. They built Habsburg Castle, Hogs Castle. Today it still stands, but it's no palace, more like a crooked medieval farmhouse. They simply couldn't afford more. The Habsburgs quickly earned a dark reputation. One legend tells of a noble who seduced a craftsman's daughter, promised to marry her, then abandoned her when she was pregnant. When she confronted him, he threw her into a dungeon and starved her to death. She cursed the family to a terrible end. If the curse was real, it came with a long delay because the family only grew stronger. Habsburg relied on two strategies. Serve the Holy Roman Emperor and win his favor? Risky, since failure could mean death. And second, hunt for wealthy noblewomen to marry. Land came as part of the dowry. Marriage for them wasn't romance, it was business. Many nobles thought this way, but the Habsburgs took it into another level. Their breakthrough came with Rudolf I. He secured Austria for the family. He wasn't a gentleman. Once, after being insulted by a neighboring count, Rudolf invaded, burned the land, bribed the guards, stormed the castle, and killed the count himself. But his greatest skill was in a marriage and court politics. He married a wealthy countess gaining status. He charmed the emperor with flattery and gifts. When a bishop rebelled, Rudolf burned a convent of nuns to prove his loyalty. Terrible? Yes, but it worked. When the emperor died, Rudolf used his 11 children to seal marriage alliances, bribed princes, and in 1273 became Holy Roman Emperor. From that moment, the Habsburgs' obsession was set. Marry, expand, repeat. By the early 1500s, the world was changing. Columbus had crossed the ocean. The Renaissance was in full bloom. Empires were rising. France under the Bourbons, the Ottomans pressing into Europe, Russia growing stronger, and the Habsburgs? They were at the center of it all. Much of this was thanks to Maximilian I, known as the Marriage Emperor. But marrying Mary of Burgundy, he gained the wealthy Low Countries. Then he married his son Philip to Joanna of Castile, bringing Spain under Habsburg's influence. In just 2 generations, without winning a single huge battle, Maximilian's family controlled more land than Charlemagne. His motto said it all: "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." While Mars, the god of war, favored other rulers, Venus, the goddess of love, handed the Habsburgs entire kingdoms. But with great wealth and power came constant fear. What if marriage alliance backfired? Their solution was chillingly simple. Stop marrying outside the family, start marrying inside it. Close kin marriage, what we now call inbreeding, became their all-purpose tool for keeping power sealed within the dynasty. Wasn't this a taboo? Absolutely. Across most of the world, cultures developed strict rules against it, often from hard observation. Close-kin unions produced sickly or infertile children. Over time, that logic became tradition, and tradition became religious law, but not everywhere. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs marrying their sisters wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Pharaohs were considered gods, and divine blood could not be watered down. Everyone knows Queen Nefertiti, but her husband? Likely her own brother. Their son was the most famous boy king in history, Tutankhamun. Tut was no flawless god. He was a genetic disaster. He had bone necrosis, clubfoot, a cleft palate, and could only turn his whole body just to look sideways. He died at 19. His attempts to produce an heir with his sister ended only in stillborn children. And Egypt wasn't the only one place. The Ptolemaic family, Greeks who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great, copied this tradition and pushed it further. Cleopatra VII, she married both her younger brothers, one after another. This wasn't about love, it was a royal strategy. The Ptolemies believed their royal blood was godlike and must stay pure. These weddings aimed to keep power in the family and stop messy fights over who would rule next. The result? While Cleopatra's brilliance hid her family decline, many Ptolemies suffered from extreme weight, unstable minds, and weakened bodies. Their family line ended when Cleopatra died by suicide. No healthy child survived from their union with Mark Antony. Another great kingdom fell because of its pure blood obsession. Europe, however, mostly rejected this. Deep taboos against marrying close relatives existed long before Christianity. Greek myth told cautionary tales. Oedipus, who unknowingly married his mother, brought plague to his city and blinded himself in shame. Romans made marriage between kin a crime. The most depraved emperors like Caligula and Nero were accused of breaking these bonds as a proof of their corruption. Then came Christianity. Early Christians took a hard stance. To them, Roman morals were decadent and sinful. Close kin marriage was deeply forbidden. St. Augustine even noted that pagans avoided it. Yes, Adam and Eve's children had to marry siblings at first, but once humanity grew, God explicitly forbade it. The Catholic Church saw opportunity. In fragmented 8th century Europe, it held little real power against kings, so it weaponized kinship laws, stretching forbidden unions far beyond immediate family. From first cousins to also second and third cousins. Marriage to a stepmother or brother widow, sin. By the late 8th century, even marrying your godparents' family was forbidden, termed spiritual impurity by the church. Breaking these rules could mean excommunication for nobles or death for commoners. Suddenly, rulers struggled to find acceptable spouses. Only the church could approve marriages, giving popes huge power. This also had unexpected effect. Breaking up tight-knit clans forced people to marry further away, likely planting the seeds of European individualism. But the Black Death changed everything. Terrified of plague, nobles barricaded themselves in their castles. Church rules were quietly ignored. Better to marry a cousin inside your safe walls than risk death traveling for a pure match. Among the elite, close-kin marriage even became fashionable again. And no family embraced this risky trend more completely than the Habsburgs. In 1496, one marriage set in motion a chain of events that would define the fate of Europe for the centuries. Habsburg heir Philip the Handsome wed Joanna of Castile, a union that promised the Habsburgs a claim to the powerful Spanish crown. Joanna came from a line already tangled in cousin marriages. Her parents were second cousins. And while she appeared physically healthy, mental instability ran deep in her family tree. Joanna's reaction to Philip was not the cool political calculation of a royal match. She fell instantly, obsessively, and dangerously in love. Philip, however, was a true Habsburg strategist. Politics first, emotions later. Even on their wedding day, he openly flirted with her ladies-in-waiting. Joanna's passion soared into jealousy, then deepened into madness. In one infamous episode, she attacked a woman she believed to be her rival, cutting her hair and slashing her face with scissors. Philip, alarmed and embarrassed, left her behind in Spain. Joanna collapsed into depression, neglecting herself entirely. When she was sent back to Philip, the obsession and paranoia only deepened. She tore pieces from his clothing, attacked any woman who came near him, and even threatened to starve herself during arguments. When her mother, Queen Isabella of Castile, died, Joanna technically became queen, but her father, King Ferdinand, and her husband fought bitterly over who would control the regency. Fate intervened when Philip caught smallpox and died unexpectedly. Joanna was shattered beyond reason. She refused to bury him, preserving his corpse with honey and traveling across the Spain with the coffin, speaking to it, forbidding any woman to come near it, and moving only at night. Pregnant and mentally unstable, Joanna was eventually confined by her own son, Charles V. She spent the next 39 years in isolation, dying at 75, remembered forever as Joanna the Mad. Her life was not just a personal tragedy, but a dark omen for the Habsburgs' future. Yet, while Joanna wasted away, the Habsburg Empire under Charles V reached its greatest height. By the mid-1500s, Charles ruled over Spain, Austria, Netherlands, parts of Italy and Germany, and West colonies in the Americas, lands so extensive that it was said the sun never set on the Habsburgs Empire. Some modern historians even compare him to an early architect of the European Union. But Charles was also a walking reminder of his dynasty growing genetic problem. His infamous Habsburg Jaw, a severely protruding lower jaw that left his mouth perpetually open, was already legendary. A peasant once shouted during a procession, "Your Majesty, shut your mouth. The flies in this country are very insolent." Determined to keep his empire intact, Charles made the fateful decision that would doom his line. Habsburgs would marry Habsburgs. He himself married his first cousin. Of his 8 children, only 3 survived infancy: 2 daughters and 1 son, Philip. The daughters married cousins. The son, Philip II of Spain, inherited not only the jaw, but also his father's sharp intellect and unyielding belief in unified Catholic Habsburg world. Philip II's love life reads like a grim comedy of dynastic desperation. First wife, cousin Maria of Portugal. Married at 16, died at 17 during childbirth. Their only child, Don Carlos, was violently unstable, physically deformed, and prone to murderous rages. He plotted to kill his father and died imprisoned at 23. Second wife, Mary I, the Bloody Mary of England, Philip married for the English crown. Mary adored him. He adored power. No children. She died during a mysterious fever epidemic. Third wife, Elizabeth of Valois, France. For once, Philip truly loved his wife, but she bore him only daughters and died at childbirth with their 5th child, another girl. Fourth wife, Anna of Austria. In desperation for a male heir, Philip married his niece. At last, a son survived, Philip III. The Spanish throne was now secure, but the genetic toll was becoming catastrophic. By the 1600s, European royalty had become a tightly knit global dynasty, marrying almost exclusively within their own small circle. A famous photograph shows Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of Britain, and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, all first cousins with strictly similar features. The royal disease hemophilia, which plagued Nicholas' son Alexei, had been passed down from Queen Victoria and was amplified by generations of intermarriage, paving the way for Rasputin's influence in Russia. Even in modern times, the pattern continued. Queen Elizabeth II married her third cousin, Prince Philip, but unlike the Spanish Habsburgs, most royal families in the wider European network had greater genetic diversity. The Spanish branch, however, had sealed its fate. By the mid-1600s, Spain, once fabulously rich from the New World silver and gold, was bankrupt. Endless wars like the ruinous 30 Years' War drained the treasury. Gold that could have built industries and trade instead bought foreign armies and paintings for the royal palaces. Meanwhile, the Habsburg marriage strategy had become genetic self-destruction. 9 out of 11 Spanish Habsburg marriages in this era were between close relatives. Infant mortality was 50% higher than of a common Spanish peasants, despite the most expensive physicians in Europe. The final act of the tragedy came with the Charles II of Spain, the grandson of Philip III and the great-great-great-grandson of Joanna the Mad. His family tree was less a tree and more a noose. By the 5th generation, where a healthy lineage would have 32 distinct ancestors, Charles had only 10. His father was his mother's uncle. His mother was the child of first cousin marriage, who themselves were children of another cousin marriages. Modern genetics has only confirmed the disaster. In 2019, researchers calculated Charles' inbreeding coefficient. The probability that 2 copies of a gene were identical due to a shared ancestry. For the average modern person, this number is near 0. For the child of an uncle-niece union, it's about 0.125. For Charles II, 0.254. Twice the genetic load of a single uncle-niece marriage, the result of centuries of interwoven family ties. Contemporaries left scratching portraits of the king. Small, weak, his face ugly, he cannot walk straight unless supported. As weak in mind as in his body, he can be made to do anything for the lack of his own will. The details are grim. His jaw was so deformed he could barely chew and drooled constantly. He suffered epilepsy, rickets, frequent fevers, fainting spells, and hallucinations. He likely could not produce children. He didn't speak until the age 4, walk until 8, and never advanced beyond basic court etiquette. One of his physicians summed it up: "Your Majesty suffers not from one disease, but from the accumulated burden of 4 centuries of inbreeding." Desperate for an heir, his advisors arranged 2 marriages. The first wife, a French princess, expected a powerful king and found instead a sicky man-child more interested in playing with court dwarfs than ruling. She died childless, possibly poisoned. The second wife, a proud German princess, arrived to find a court in decline. Charles ignored her, focusing almost entirely on food. She schemed to place her own nephew on the throne. In 1700, at the age of just 38, Charles died without an heir. The Spanish Habsburg male line was gone. The curse, whether supernatural or genetic, had finally played out. His death set off the War of the Spanish Succession, sometimes called the First World War. France and Austria fought bitterly over who would inherit Spain, dragging in England, Netherlands, and much more of Europe. Over 1 million people died. In the end, France's Bourbon dynasty claimed the throne, and their descendants still rule Spain today. The Austrian branch of the Habsburgs lived on, but the original Spanish line, the one that had married itself into extinction, was history. It's tempting to think cousin marriage is a medieval oddity, something long gone. But even today, studies estimate that over 10% of marriages worldwide are between first and second cousins. By comparison, polygamy, often considered more traditional in some cultures, accounts for only about 2%. The practice is declining in most countries, but it persists, driven by family tradition, political strategy, and a belief in keeping the bloodline pure. For centuries, this was the default among royalty and aristocracy. Monarchs didn't just marry for love. They married for alliances, for land, for power. And the closer the blood tie, the more secure the claim. But the Habsburg story proves the cost of this thinking. Without centuries of calculated cousin marriages, the political map of Europe might have looked entirely different. The Habsburg Empire, vast, powerful, and deeply influential, was built on vows between relatives, backed by special permissions from the Pope and defended by armies. But it was undone by the very purity it tried to preserve. The dynasty's tale is a reminder that empires don't just fall on the battlefields. Sometimes they collapse in the nurseries and sick rooms, undone by the private choices of kings and queens. The Habsburgs paid for their empire with their own blood, and in the end, that currency ran out. So the Habsburgs chose power over prudence, and at the end, their dream of a pure-blooded dynasty collapsed under the weight of its own legacy. A story where love letters held more sway than swords, until biology wrote the final chapter. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment shocked you the most? Was it Joanna's tragic devotion, or maybe Charles' II heartbreaking struggles? Which doomed dynasty should we explore next? The Romanovs? Bourbons? Tell me your pick. If this tale of tangled crowns moved you, a little like truly helps me share more stories like this. And if you're new here, I'd be so honored if you join our circle. Tap subscribe for more whispered secrets of the past. One last question for the comments. What's the true cost of chasing perfection? I'll be reading every answer with the tea in hand, I promise. Thank you from my heart for wandering these shadowed halls of history with me. And thank you for watching. Kiss.